Hello and welcome. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has meant that now, more than ever, parents and caregivers across Australia understand the impact that missing school has on a child's life. And the reason for this is that everybody has lived it and experienced it, both from an educational perspective and, more importantly, a child's need to socialise and feel connected with their friends. But what about if your child was unable to attend school long term due to chronic illness or possibly due to a family member, parents or siblings being immunocompromised? Now, did you know that before COVID-19 that this situation affected more than 60,000 children in Australia? But thankfully, there's an outstanding organisation called MissingSchool that was founded to revolutionise this very situation with a view of keeping children connected and ending their missing school for good. So to help talk to us about this today, we welcome our special guest, Megan Gilmour, a social innovator who has worked on complex social and economic development operations across 24 countries. Now, she is an expert in raising funding for dynamic innovation projects and a leader in governance and systems research and advocacy for students missing school because of serious illness. And she's also one of the co-founders of MissingSchool. Now, they are a charity dedicated to keeping seriously sick and injured children connected to their classrooms. Thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Hi, Rachel. Thank you for having me. I'm so delighted to be here to share with you what we're doing across Australia.
Yes, and I'm very honoured to be able to help sort of get that message out to as many family and sort of households as possible. Now, to begin with, I'd love to understand, how did MissingSchool come about? And if you could tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so MissingSchool came about from my own personal journey and that of two other mums in Canberra when our children experienced life-threatening complex illnesses. Fortunately, our boys all survived those illnesses, but we realised at the time that they were, going through these medical treatments and separated from their school for very long periods of time, that, while they were prepared to and had to, in fact, deal with the medical situation and all the harsh treatments that they were experiencing, that they really longed for that connection back to school. They really missed their friends, their learning, the fun of being normal and belonging in their community. And so as mothers, we came together to try and solve this problem of, I guess, forced absence from school because of an illness, and what schools could actually do to help solve that problem.
So Missing Schools is about keeping seriously sick children connected to their regular schools and getting, I guess, their special learning and their social needs met through, I guess, everyday practices in their schools. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And you can imagine, as we discovered, that while there's so much goodwill out there in schools, they actually find it incredibly hard to provide an education service to children who aren't in the classroom. Which makes the COVID-19 situation extraordinary in the way that it has demonstrated the roles of schools and how quickly they needed to be able to do that, i.e., provide an education service to children who can't be in the classroom because of a health crisis. Just so happens to be a community-wide global health crisis, as opposed, I guess, to an individual health crisis. But
everybody's
nonetheless
experiencing the same thing at the same time, and they really can empathize with the situation now, because, as I said in the introduction, everybody's experienced it, both from an education perspective and then how it really does affect children's ability to not be social with their friends and everything else. Incredible.
And indeed for parents as well. So parents needing to continue their work life for economic and financial reasons across this time, or even across, a family illness, that illness of their child, and then also trying to attend to their child's education, which of course is about more than academics.
Yes.
It's actually about, it's developmental. And when, as we do, we value education as an everyday part of life for our kids, it's also showing them that they have a future that we believe in, and that we're working to assist them to achieve.
So
important.
important.
This is also a big message. Yeah.
Yes. That is so important, to be able to show them that you believe in their future. That is really, really important, very, very powerful. So yes,
Yeah.
I hear that. And so I understand that Missing School aims to correct the balance using specialised technology. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yes. So when we started Missing School back in 2012, the first thing that we realised is that we didn't really have any research on this issue, and we set about to get that. In other words, before I come to the technology, it was really about, well, what do you do when children miss school? How do you get them back to the classroom? So think about 2012 rather than 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the research where we found that there were more than 60,000 students missing school, often for long periods because of a serious illness or injury, but actually that we had to kind of try to work that out through all different data sets, because there's no counting of these children through a data set in Australia. And actually that holds true for many countries in the world. The second thing is we couldn't find any evidence-based approaches across Australia that were being consistently used to connect children to their school during that absence. And the third thing we found is that, of course, it is the responsibility of our schools and our education systems. So our idea at the time was, well, it must be technology, because there's no proxy for presence. You're either there or you're not there. Sure, you can have a go between, you can write letters, but it's not the same as being present. So this concept of presence is what has driven our eventual application, our way of dealing with this, or showing how to deal with this, which we did after governments came back to us and said, well, what's the solution? This was after we launched the 2015 report to a Prime Minister's statement of support and over 160 media articles. The government just said, well, what's the solution? Which we weren't expecting, to be honest. We thought once we raised this issue up that everybody would sort of know what to do. But that gave us an amazing opportunity, which was to put kids back into classroom through telepresence robots. And these robots stand in the classroom for these students when they can't be there, and so they can dial in from their hospital or home through their own device, be seen and heard in their classroom, see and hear their peers and their teachers, and take their lessons in real time, and engage in social activities like lunchtime or assemblies or rites of passage. But importantly, they can move around. They control the robot and can move it in that classroom environment from their remote location.
So this allows the child to see and hear the lessons, but most importantly, to interact with their teacher and their friends as well. So that both the teacher and their friends can see the child via the screen, which is in the classroom, and I believe the child can navigate the robot through their computer or tablet if they're at home or in hospital, and they can actually talk and interact with the teacher and their friends. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So the robot actually moves, and I really want to point out this key difference, because as we went into COVID-19, well, first let me say our schools already had the technologies for video conferencing. Zoom was already there, Skype was already there, there were laptops in schools, but schools still weren't using this technology for the purpose you and I are discussing. And why is that? Well, probably because the schools didn't see this issue as their responsibility, because it was complex, right? They weren't there. But the great difference between robot technology and, say, a Zoom call is that you can see, the child can see a much broader area of the room, so they can see the whole kind of scope of the room, but they can also do, as you pointed out, they can turn their robot, they can move their robot, they have control of that movement and that navigation, which really means they're taking up their space in the classroom as well. They have like a physical presence as well as a digital presence, and they can move. They can turn themselves to look at things. They can look up and down, which is a key difference to to video conferencing, which isn't telepresence. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely enables, the technology enables the children to feel connected, which is really important. And, as you sort of were alluding earlier, the absence of just normal interaction in classes and with friends can really slowly chip away, I guess, at even the most resilient child. And you had an experience for that with your son. I actually had a similar experience myself when I was in year 9 at school, when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I was completely paralyzed and never really supposed to walk or do much with my life. But I really vividly recall having my MRI scan and laying there in the corridor whilst, I sort of had that sort of drumming sound. If anyone's had an MRI, it's very sort of powerful sound that you hear behind you. And as I was laying there, I was thinking all my friends were free at school, having a great time, and I was stuck inside this machine, and it was just a horrible feeling. I think for any child to be missing their life, their friends, and just normality as they would sort of know it. So I completely empathise with any child who's been in a similar situation. I remember the school was lovely enough at the time to send some of my friends, my closest friends, in a taxi to come and surprise me at the Royal Children's Hospital, as they too were actually finding it very hard. So it's not just the child itself, of course, that all of their friends. I actually found out later that they were all in the library crying when they heard what was wrong with me and about the situation, which actually prompted the school to kindly send them to come and visit me. So I think it's really important for us to just realize that this situation naturally affects the child that is sick, but of course their social network also, and everybody else that is missing them at school. So I think it's equally as important for the other students in the classroom to be able to have the interaction with their friend who is equally going through the experience and the sickness themselves as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that from a personal experience as well. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that story, Rachel. It's the two things that stand out for me there is first of all, your courage for sharing your personal experience. And I hear this so often. I do a lot of presentations and I talk to a lot of people, and you know what, there's never a single room that I'm in where somebody can't share this from a personal perspective, whether it was themselves or whether it was somebody, their friend, as you say, or a sibling, or a student that they taught. So I think the first thing is that this is so prevalent, and we probably just don't know how prevalent it is. And the second thing that you shared, which is not only your own personal experience of that, and I'm sure that's a whole other conversation, right?
yeah.
But the fact that you shared how your friends felt, that's powerful, because it's so true, and we know this from our research, that everyone in the class benefits when their friend comes back, their peer comes back. And you're right, it is absolutely important to mention not only the peers but also the siblings and what they go through.
Yep.
As well as, of course, the parents and the friends of parents. So I think what this means for me is we've got to get this solved. We really need, the first thing is for anybody who's listening to this and heard Rachel's story there, this is absolutely able to be solved. And what we're really talking about here is deep social connection that we need, and friendship. We need the learning, yes, but to belong where in your community is the most important thing as a human. So I want to encourage everyone out there, if you know anybody, just reach out to your network and let them know that about our initiative, but also that we're doing a lot of work on policy change in this country. And I truly believe that Australia can be best in the world at this solution. I believe it in my heart, and I am committed to seeing it through until one day this kind of connection just happens as business as usual every day, everywhere across Australia.
Absolutely. Completely support that. Now, we published your article, and the title is COVID-19 Restrictions Are Just a Glimpse of Everyday Reality for Sick Children and Their Families. Now, for someone who hasn't read the article yet, can you please tell us what it's about and what inspired you to write it?
Yes, and thank you for this opportunity, and for putting our article forward to your audience. So, really, what we wanted to say about the COVID-19 situation is that what we saw across COVID-19 was that many of these children were more supported because now everyone was at home. So they had that inclusion. And what has happened is, as classes have gone back, and I note that that's not true in Victoria, but as classes have gone back, once again, they're left out. And, it just comes back to, how schools operate. So the other thing that occurred that we wanted to really point out is that the COVID-19 situation meant that more children were now in this situation because of their complex medical conditions or because of their medical vulnerability. Children who would have been at school, usually even with a chronic condition, were now needing to stay home as well because they were at increased risk. Not only that, but their siblings, so that they, that they weren't bringing the virus home, but also the children of parents who have a medical vulnerability. So the point here is that the number of students in this predicament has increased.
Significantly, yes. And look, in general, what have you found are some of the most common challenges that children with illnesses experience when missing school?
Okay. I'm happy to say that we've collected over 2,000 data points now across the 3 years. And by the way, we're right at our 3-year anniversary of implementing this Australian first, and it was at the time a world first.
Congratulations.
National, thank you, national telepresence robot pilot working across all illness groups across every state in Australia and across all school systems. Mm-hmm. And the 3 things that we identified, which using peer-reviewed research and literature on this issue as the top 3 issues these children face is, as perceived by their parents, is 1, the disconnection with peers and relationships, disruptions to relationships, and the difficulty it is to maintain those. The second thing is academic underachievement. And the third thing, importantly, and we hear this all the time, is the anxiety created by I guess the illness, but mainly missing school, and then that anxiety of returning to school and transitioning in and out of school, always as I'm here, but then tomorrow I'm not, and that disruption as well.
Yeah, so there's definitely deep anxiety, loneliness, and isolation, especially in the situation where there's been at least 12 months of school absence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be 12 months. It can be any frame of time, I think. And yes. How can children's school absence affect them once they return back to school then? Yes,
so this is a good question too. It's one of those things that happens with going back to school is a lot of anxiety. But I think one of the points about these, what we call the side effects of missing school, is that many of them can be lifelong. And that's why we need to intervene now, today. We can't wait till they're well. Many children who are unwell like to continue with their education and engage in their school, and actually can, which is something people aren't aware of. And one of the things that you and I touched upon earlier in the conversation is futures. And what we know is that when there's a chronic illness present, or a serious illness ongoing, and there's school absence connected to that, it actually affects school completion rates. It lowers school completion rates. That in turn has implications for career attainment. And so what we're looking at is social and emotional impacts and financial impacts going forward into the future. In other words, with the contribution that we're making, and it's absolutely essential to save lives, but we also need to be able to make sure that we can create the environment for a life worth living as well. And I often sum that up as, it's about more than saving bodies. It's about saving hearts and minds at the same time, so that these children can have a positive future and reach their potential now and into their future.
Absolutely. So, and in general, I guess for the children that had returned back to school, I've read that through your research, you found that they found it very difficult to adjust and form friendships, and their learning sort of suffered also, which is something that we need to take into serious consideration as well.
Yes.
I'd like to know, do you believe that there's a power imbalance between adults and children when it comes to this issue? And if so, how does this affect children's vulnerability and power then in this situation?
Well, you just touched upon something there in your summation, and that is, when children are unwell, they get labelled with having a disease, or they get labelled as a patient. But really, they're children, and their identity as learners is a key factor in personal agency, and education is a key factor in personal agency and being able to be more empowered. So I think that, look, definitely young children especially are not agreeing to their medical treatment. We're making that decision for them, and we should. But this is where I come back to that fact, and to speak to that power imbalance is, if we are doing that on their behalf, we have a responsibility to make sure that we give them what they want and what they need, not just what we see. And we see this coming out in our work too, where even when we do start to refocus, schools and families on the child's education, everybody's worried about maths and English. But you know what? Maybe they just want to go to music class. Maybe they want to watch and participate in a conversation in art class. Maybe they just want to have lunch with their friends. And I think we really want to make sure that, even in providing a robot, that the student's own voice is coming through in what they want that for. Because right now it might just be social connection, but what we also see, which excites me, is once you put them back in the school, we've seen parents report that it's given them resilience to face their illness and to get better. And it's given them hope, and it's given them, where they might have been disengaged with school, it's given them a way to get back in. So I think that's all about the student's voice and what they need, and understanding that. And we adults need to listen.
Yes. And within the current status quo, what is it that is currently hurting children, and what other admissions or oversights are there that we haven't maybe sort of touched on that we should be aware of?
Yes, so I mentioned earlier that, well, one of the things that drives all of this is that schools find it incredibly hard to provide an education service to children outside the classroom. And why is that? Well, without getting too technical, I'll give you hopefully like a little short snapshot of what we've worked out in our theory of change. And that is, we can't change the illness except with treatment. And sometimes there aren't cures. And in that sense, when they can't attend school because of their illness, it's marked by the school as an explained absence, just like a common cold. So then what happens is the school in that way says, okay, they're allowed to be not here. They have a legitimate reason. And when children are unwell, schools stop support because they're not in the classroom and they're unwell. So you can see that when it's kind of looked at and coded in this way, as if it's an explained absence, it just ceases the support for the school. So what actually then happens is, because they're invisible and they're at home, they're at home and they're invisible to the school, I should say, they're unseen and they're allowed not to be there. Over time, all of these policies, procedures, practices, funding, standards and guidelines that schools would use have not been developed, even though the law is there. At the top of the tree, the law is there to say they're covered by disability legislation and regulation and the disability standards for education. And, you know, they have a right to continue to access their classrooms and a right to participate on equal terms to their peers.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got the law. We now have a way to put them back in the classroom with, say, telepresence robots, just like wheelchair or access ramps in the school. These robots allow them to be present. And what we're trying to work on now is all of those middle bits to fill in the policy, to fill in the processes and guidelines and procedures, the
Mm-hmm.
teacher training and professional development, and all of those things that will make it an everyday reality.
Mm-hmm. And on this, I mean, what are the ethics of child protection and how would applying them make a difference at all?
Yeah, so we often talk about it as a child protection issue because, you know, it's harmful. Social isolation is harmful. And while we could say, you know, there's no one to blame here in the sense that it's a kind of wicked problem and it's complex, what we do now is we have a solution and we need to implement it for, you know, we would say that school attendance is a protective factor in an otherwise setting of many risks for these children. So it's absolutely a child protection issue in that sense. And people might find that uncomfortable to hear, but, you know, we do need to make sure that while they're getting their medical treatment, and hopefully, you know, they come through that, that they can have all of the things they need for their development and that are important to them. And yeah, so I think you're asking some really important questions that I don't often get asked, and I find that super cool that we get
Cool.
to talk about this.
Well, I mean, otherwise, I mean, what are some of the common assumptions that are made about sick children that the people generally, just make an assumption about?
And I love this question too. And I know this comes from your experience because people who've had an experience like this ask these kinds of questions. So one of the common assumptions is they're too sick, we need to wait until they're well. That's one very common assumption. And I touched on that before. The second common assumption is, oh, there's hospital school. Well, there is hospital school, but only in tertiary hospitals, not in every hospital. And hospital school services is super stretched. And we also know now that there are many, many, many children who are never in hospital but are at home for long periods. And we know that even children who do have hospital treatment, hospital stays are shortening. And I think this is an important point to make here, is this is an emerging issue. The number of students are growing because medical science is taking leaps and bounds. We have treatments and cures that we didn't have previously. And so many children are surviving serious illnesses, living longer with lifelong illnesses, and also getting better diagnoses as well, meaning that there's a growing number of children that are having, you know, a serious illness that they live through and are missing school because of it. And hospital stays are shortening as well because of better healthcare. So they're spending a lot of time at home with little to no support in a lot of cases. And way too often, you know, that is the case. So, you know, a stat that I'd like to put forward here now, which is a bit confronting, is that in developed countries like Australia, up to 30% of students will have a chronic illness, will be living with a chronic illness. That's almost 1 in 3 students. And I think even at school, these kids probably might not be seen. So here's the next assumption. If you're not at school because of a serious illness, then you're not kind of fit for education. like we better wait till you're well. And the other assumption is that when you're back at school, you're completely well. And that's not necessarily true either. And
Yep.
students in school need extra support to get, to be able to enjoy their education and their social connections to reach their potential.
Yes.
So I can translate that stat to you into Australian numbers of students. So 1.185 million students is a third of the student population, just to give a perspective.
Incredible amount. And with that, with the current climate, I mean, has COVID added pressures or impacted the Missing School program? And I mean, if so, because I mean, I understand that due to the pandemic, the medical vulnerability of a sibling, a parent, or a guardian actually means the number of children who are unable to attend school is much larger than before. And as we said at the start of the chat, that pre-COVID, that there were more than 60,000 children in Australia who didn't have the option of attending school due to their own serious long-term illness. So it's not only sick children who are affected in this situation, but with COVID, it's the children of parents who are immunocompromised and therefore reluctant to send their children back to school as well. So I'd just love to know how COVID has really impacted current operations.
Yes, for us, it's just meant that there's a greater call for our services, and we've been trying to do that on the same amount of funding, and of course charities have been impacted like businesses and the community generally in terms of funding, and we just need more funds to be able to scale up our service and to make sure that it's available to as many students as possible. And that, so everything needs funds to drive it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing. The other thing is we're really hoping and trying and testing at the moment that schools and education systems will fund these types of services and activities, because it is actually a school responsibility. And to date, we've been doing it as a charitable initiative. As we reach out to ask for contributions from schools, unfortunately, in many cases, schools are saying once they find out that we're asking for a contribution, which is voluntary, by the way, that the placement doesn't go ahead, and that just tells me that schools are probably still not seeing that this is actually something that they should be doing.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to sort of just speak about the wider family unit also. I mean, does this situation affect siblings of children who have chronic illness, and if so, because I mean, my understanding is the siblings of children who have chronic illness are restricted for fear of passing on, I guess, any illness to their unwell brother or sister, and they too can be discouraged from attending school due to the risk of bringing infections back home and that sort of stuff also. So I'd love just to know.
Yes, so that's happening, and we just honestly have no idea about that number in the COVID context.
Mm-hmm.
And but in this general context, siblings are absolutely affected and are often the most unseen of all, and that has an emotional impact on them. They're often having to, like the whole family, adapt to this situation all of the time in a medical context. They too miss school often for long periods, especially if the child with a serious illness needs to have treatment in a place other than their home, which happens often if you're in a rural or remote community area, or indeed where children travel interstate for their treatment, which is also a common thing as well. You'll see that the siblings are either going with one parent in that context, or and they're missing school, or having to maybe do some hospital school if the hospital school will allow it, and in many cases it can't accommodate, so they're going to another community school. So a big shout out there for siblings, and I really wish we had more data on it for the COVID context. But we do know from our own data sets that parents, at least 20% of parents, report that the sibling misses school off an awful long period because of their brother or sister being unwell.
Yes.
So that's 1 in 5.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And I mean, from your view, what does it take to make behavioural change in adults, and that being education and health practitioners and parents as well?
Yes. So the first thing that I would love everybody to take away from this is we should never assume to wait till they're well. We should always be asking them what they need now and accommodating that, because after all, they're putting in a big job, aren't they, to try and get back to school themselves, whether it's a lifelong illness or a chronic or indeed an acute illness, and they're going through all of that. So I feel like that's a really important point. The second one is to make sure that we are providing them with what they need to get back to school. And I talked about telepresence robots as like wheelchair ramps in school, and to understand that they have not only a right to be educated, even based on their difference, but also that the Disability Standards for Education, which sits under the Disability Discrimination Act, a national act that applies to every education provider across the country, no matter where that is or what type of school system it is, provides for children with illness to be able to maintain their education, access their school, receive their curriculum and participate and get support with assistive devices on equal terms to their peers, so that they can be present in their schools. And Rachel, maybe 5 years ago that was harder because we didn't have the technology to get them there, but
Yes.
it's absolutely available. It's cost effective. It just makes sense. So I would love parents, educators, the wider community to know that, as I said earlier, it's not only a right, but it's also the law. And we already know, we've proven it's able to be done, and many, many great schools are out there doing it already. We just need to make sure that everybody knows about this and understands the legality of it and embraces the solutions. And I think that, as I said earlier, I think Australia can really, because we have those laws, we can be best in the world at this. We can do this.
And in what ways can people help the Missing School charity then? Where can they find you guys?
www.missingschool.org.au. Donations are always welcome. We have done this on the smallest, most minute budget, and we're also looking for community members to share what we're doing, to share with their friends and families about the essential nature of this for children and who are in this predicament, and as you said, their peers as well. When we talk about how many students we've supported, we also count in that the number of peers on estimate as well, because that's the connection, right? It's that joining together again and being back in that community. So my great wish leaving this conversation is that more people know about this, more people talk about it, and more people expect this to happen in their schools, in their school communities every day. And that, that the funds get opened up, however that happens, for it to happen across Australia, and we make it business as usual. We all join together, and everybody can do at least one thing, which is, believe in the future and the present of children who are unwell. Yes. To share that message.
Look, Megan, this has been wonderful chatting with you. We'll have all of the links in the show notes so people can find you and make a donation. And just wanted to thank you once again for your time. But take care and stay in touch. I personally will be watching this throughout the next 6 to 12 months and beyond as well. I can't wait to see where it's going to go. Well, thank you so much.
Rachel.
You take care.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.